The Durin's folk, children of Aule, Khazad, Dawid, the mine-digging, beard-braiding, axe-wielding, ale-loving, grudge-keeping folk that came from the Lord of the Rings and stayed for good in most of the fantasy universes and in our hearts. It is a great injustice that there is not a lot of video games focused on the Dwarven culture. Some good games like Baldur's Gate 3 let you create a dwarf character, but it will not give you a feeling of being a dwarf among dwarves doing dwarven things. There are some worthy games that put the bearded folk in unexpected, even non-fantasy situations, like Deep Rock Galactic, where a brotherhood of dwarves go to space to diggy some holes and shooty some monsters. So now we wait for the dwarves to appear in western and post-apocalyptic setting. If anybody would survive it, it's them. But what about the classic fantasy setting?
Baruch Khazad! Khazad Aimenu! Greetings, I am Not-a-witchr, and no, I haven't even met Yarpen Zigrin. What, I must know all my cousins from Mahakam? Anyways, would you like to know which games let you truly embrace the beard and enjoy being a dwarf or even a dwarven ruler? I've chosen 9 such games, from older and newer titles, a whole variety of genres, RPGs, strategies, simulators, even an FPS, so you might find something specifically for you. Because if you don't like dwarves, what are you doing here?
The oldest game in this list is Disciples 2, a turn-based strategy from 2002. Unfortunately, it was always overshadowed by the Heroes of Might and Magic series, but don't make a mistake, Disciples has its own unique atmosphere and gameplay features. The second game in the series features the Mountain Clans as one of the 4 main playable factions. I don't say races, because it includes not only dwarves but also giants, yeti, and an occasional hobbit at a support role. But nonetheless, the Mountain Clans are mainly true dwarves. Just look at their faces, you can't get more Scottish than that. The main treat of Disciples is its unit progression system, when after receiving enough combat experience, the unit becomes another, more powerful unit, sometimes changing quite dramatically, like a regular hill giant that can become an ice giant or a tempest giant, depending on the building you choose in the building tree in your capital. And this is the only game that lets you raise your lowly dwarf to a warrior, then veteran, then venerable warrior, and up to a dwarf king. That is how Dwarven democracy works. Does this mean that you can have more than one king in your party? Hard to say, because the amount of XP it takes to upgrade the social status of this unit is so ridiculous that basically it is possible only in the campaign, where some of your units carry over to the next map. So if you like turn-based strategies and dwarves, this game is for you. If we're talking classic dwarves from the Lord of the Rings universe, there are several good games worth mentioning. First of them is The Battle for Middle-earth 2, a real-time strategy set in the Third Age, but not tied directly to the story of the Fellowship of the Rings and focused on the war in the North. Actually, the game takes a lot of liberties lore-wise, starting with the fact that you can play for the forces of evil and lead them to complete victory, and ending with the fact that you can have Tom Bombadil as a super weapon on the battlefield. But still, it's better than the Rings of Power TV show, which of course is a low bar. However, the dwarves as a faction are great, stout and sturdy if not very fast, but they can use mines, the buildings that generate your resources, for moving the troops across the map, and you can even build a mineshaft near the enemy base during your assault to deploy constant flow of reinforcements from your base. Also, you can call for a bunch of hobbits in a battle, although I'm not so sure how is that of any help to the dwarves. The game is quite intense, and you have to withstand the constant waves of enemy attacks almost right from the start of every map, up until the moment you counterattack and push them to their base. So if you ever wanted to command an army of dwarves from Middle-earth, including legendary heroes like Gimli, son of Glóin, Glóin, father of Gimli, and Dain, the king of Erebor, this is your choice.
I am sometimes drunk, but I am always smart. You're just sometimes drunk.
Another great turn-based strategy, but here the dwarves were introduced only in the expansion. Hammers of Fate added Fortress as a city type, which is basically an active volcano crater slightly inhabited by dwarves, some of which are quite taller than the others. The dwarves here are the traditional grumpy fantasy Highlanders, which is nice and proper.
Humans are always hot-headed, and they lie.
They even have their own magic system, rune lore, which does not use mana, but uses resources to place runes on your troops. And it somehow feels very dwarvish, because I had to fight my own greed every time I considered whether or not to use runes in a battle. Unfortunately, the campaign starts with you playing as the human empire hero, and there is several missions before you even meet the dwarves. And you have to finish the first campaign to play the Dwarven campaign. Come on guys, it's not even the main game, it's the expansion. Why the humans always hog the attention in the fantasy games? Fortunately, the standalone maps were always my favorite part of the game, and there you can be a Dwarven ruler right away. So, if for some reason you still haven't played Heroes of Might and Magic 5, for example, if you were disappointed by the lack of dwarves in it when it first came out, then you definitely should saddle a bear and lead your bearded armies to victory in this epic game, which is still considered by many the best one in the series.
Stay at your posts. Be as steadfast as the granite of which we are made. Nothing can break us.
The game, simply named The Dwarves, is quite an unusual game. Kinda RPG, kinda point-and-click adventure, kinda visual novel with combat. It is based on the book with the same name and features a classic fantasy story about an orphan boy who was raised by a mage and have never met his own people. Except in this case, the orphan boy is a dwarf, and the whole story is revolving around Dwarven people. But before that, the game starts with a prologue/tutorial in which you learn the basics of the combat, real time with a tactical pause, which is very convenient for setting your special moves and giving orders to your characters. I liked the combat. It is quite satisfying and forces you to think on your tactics, otherwise you risk being surrounded by enemies and taken down pretty fast. You control up to 4 characters who get experience and new abilities, but there is almost no character customization, as you might expect from an RPG. Traveling on the world map feels like a board game, with visual novel elements, and is combined with the exploration of small but beautiful locations on which you have to figure out with what you can interact. Surprisingly, all the dialogue in the game is fully voiced, including the narrator lines, which is unexpected and nice.
This picture portrays the village in its state of ruin.
Examining the canvas more closely, you realize that it is actually made of skin, and the red paint seems more than suspicious now.
Altogether, a nice experience with deep focus on an original Dwarven culture, which earns the game a place in this list.
You keep your head down and say aye to any job I decide is low enough for scum like you.
Many fantasy RPGs let you create a dwarf character, but the rest of the game is hardly affected by this choice. Not so in Dragon Age Origins, where you have not only races, but also, well, origins. Dwarven characters can choose between 2 of them, which gives you 2 completely different intro chapters. As you might imagine, in a strict caste-based society of Orzammar, the life of a noble dwarf is quite different from a casteless dwarf living in Dust Town. The game has a unique approach to Dwarven culture, as well as rather dark approach to all fantasy tropes. And later in the game you return to your home city of Orzammar, and you might see it in a new light, or maybe take a chance on revenge against those that oppressed you and your family, who knows. The dwarves are actually the true heroes of Thedas, because they are fighting the Darkspawn constantly, not just when the blight comes to the surface and all other races get to participate. So, if you want to experience the ruthless and heroic dwarves of the Dragon Age universe, the first game is your only chance, because all the later games do not feature dwarf so prominently, and as much as I like Varric Tethras as a character, just look at him. He's literally the last thing that comes to your mind when you think of dwarves.
Dwarves built to last, don't they?
The darkest fantasy setting of the Warhammer universe is a good place for a dwarf. You have so many enemies to settle grudges. And what a great game Vermintide 2 is. A first-person shooter/slasher with amazing melee combat and rich atmosphere. You can practically smell the burning corpses. But the main feature of the game is the heroes, one of whom is Bardin Gorikson, a friendly dwarven ranger that can unlock other careers and become a tanky ironbreaker, a suicidal slayer, or even a quirky engineer, all with their own perks and distinctive playstyles, and a rich Warhammer lore behind them. Speaking of lore, the name of the game, Vermintide, refers to the apocalyptic invasion of Skaven, the rat people which have allied themselves with the Chaos Followers. And only our 5 heroes are bold enough to operate far behind the enemy lines in the main campaign, or venture deep into the Chaos Wastes in the roguelite game mode from the namesake expansion. The party banter in between the fighting of the enemy hordes, or often during the fight, give the process a surprisingly upbeat tone.
Head down. Oh, there's no stopping a dwarf, is there?
Trust me, I'm just warming up, presumably.
Warming up! You don't know the meaning of those words, Martin.
It fits the atmosphere of the end times perfectly, because there are situations so horrible that only an occasional joke between your mates can help you keep your sanity. So, if you want the closest to the matter experience of being a Dawid of the Warhammer Fantasy setting, search no more and just take an axe in your hands to spill some red blood. The Lord of the Rings Online has been around for more than 17 years already and still has a loyal fanbase and regular updates. And I don't think it's only because of the beloved franchise, but more because of the amazing community of the players that keep the heart of the game beating. Among those wonderful people are those dedicated souls that form and run kinships, the in-game guilds of players, including several Dwarven role-playing kinships like Durin's Folk or the Blue Mountains Regiment, mostly on the European server. And role-playing, or RP for short, can be simple, like putting some thought in your character's name and referring to yourself and your guildmates with lore-proper phrases, or more serious, like strictly following the kinship protocols on social gatherings, or even learning Khuzdul, the secret language of the Dwarves, because there are all kinds of Tolkien enthusiasts that populate the RP-encouraged servers. I still fondly remember that around 10 years ago when I played on Laurelene server, the Durin's Folk Kinship organized the annual competition with various contests like horse races on the steps of Thorin's halls, sparring tournament at the Fortress of Gondamon, musical and poetical contests, which I even have an honor of winning once, and all with real valuable prizes. The good times. And of course, if you like to go into raids in the company of other dwarves, there are plenty of people who can accompany you. So, if you wish to find like-minded dwarf players to really feel among your own folk in the world of the Middle-earth, give it a try.
High King, this is not the time for short-sightedness.
Short? There'll be no alliance with elves while I'm High King.
It is hard to describe in a few words the behemoth that is Total War Warhammer III, which now literally includes the first 2 games, with all the playable factions and legendary lords, many of which, of course, you have to buy separately. It is easily one of the biggest strategy games of today, meaning both the scale of turn-based campaigns and the scale of real-time battles with thousands of troops and monsters and magic, but I digress. The dwarves of Warhammer universe undoubtedly have the longest beards and the biggest axes of all the dwarves I've seen in games, and also the meanest temper. At the same time, Dawi are a very practical people. One of their most sacred artifacts is the Great Book of Grudges, which contains every offense they've taken from other races, maybe even all the height jokes. And when those grudges are settled, they are crossed out from the book, and it boosts morale of all the Dawi and makes them hate their enemies even more effectively. And effectiveness of the Dwarven armies is undisputable. No one can hold the line like these seasoned warriors, supported by their artillery and their aircrafts. Dwarves here don't use any mounts, and their fastest land units are the Slayers, those who swore an oath to not use any armor and to always seek glorious death or redemption in battle. If you would say that Dawi is a very proud people, you might as well say that sea is full of water. Honor is what makes their forges burn, their beards grow, and their airships fly. So, if you want to experience war as a dwarf, the best thing is Total War Warhammer 3. As a bonus, I recommend checking out Windrose, because these guys understand what it means to be a dwarf.
It is time to journey from every mountain. Come, rally together. Bring your axes and tools, craft and courage. It is time. We dwarves return to Moria.
It feels right that this last game is about Middle-earth. After all, Tolkien's dwarves were the first and still are the most canonical. My opinion is that no other game catches the spirit of the original Children of Aule, the Durin's folk, as accurately as this dwarf simulator. Because true dwarves are not just about battle frenzy, they are very much about reclaiming what was theirs and was taken from them. And also about taking pride in your work, be that building, fighting, or just digging holes. In this game you might spend more time gathering resources than killing goblins, and you might even enjoy the former more than the latter. The game takes place in the 4th Age of Middle-earth, the least explored period, set after the Exodus of Elves and obviously after the events of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And the game has the utmost respect for Tolkien's lore, specifically his books, not just Peter Jackson's movies. This is obvious in many little details, like the fact that Gandalf used his dwarven name Tharkun in the notes that he left throughout Moria. Or, another example, you encounter goblin men, who were bred by Saruman, but are not to be confused with Uruk-hai or even with half-orcs, although the exact difference is unclear. Such dedication to the original source material warms my nerdy heart greatly. And the songs! Your dwarf might caught an inspiration when gathering ore and start singing good old Middle-earth tunes.
And if I should fade my one true love, if I should fade, said she, could you forgive what I become when nothing's left of me?
The game lets you explore the depths of Moria with friends, and it probably was created primarily as a co-op game. But nonetheless, you can expect a lot of fun playing it solo and taking all the loot and treasures for yourself. Seriously, I can't recommend it enough, especially if you like creating things as much as destroying other things, or simply enjoy survival crafting simulators. Return to Moria made me feel as a dwarf more than any other game in this list.
So that was some games for the true dwarves. If I forgot something, please let me know in the comments. And thank you for watching. If you like videos like this, consider subscribing. I am still not a witcher, and as always, take care and farewell.
Your wife, she may be fine, may give kisses sweet as wine. My lover's got a beard as bright as brass. Yours may smith 1,000 blades, while mine rushes oils and braids. My lover's got a beard as bright as brass. My lover, I can see her cross the dimmest, darkest paths, like some summoned being of light, ever there to guide me right. My lover's got a beard as bright as brass.